That's okay. The next one for you, Matt Hern, was when you spoke at Camas last time. I personally heard you say that primitivism was not realistic because of global population. Derek Jensen has said that the only thing that can maintain a population of 7 billion people is global capitalism, and global capitalism is killing the earth. I'd like to hear your responses to that. Your thoughts on that?
Sure, it may or may not be true. I mean, so to me, the circumstance, we got to where we got to, right? Now what? That seems to me the exigency, and I cannot think of, and I in a very, very long way from accusing you of genocide. So let that be there, right there. Except to say, except that I want to say I cannot think of a way of massive population reduction in a way that not only makes any sense but makes any ethical sense to me. So I like the idea of rethinking the world, like playing the what if we had 1 billion people on Earth, what would it look like then? That's immensely attractive to me, for sure, right? But I don't see it. I just don't see it, and so I think that, to my mind, I'm not much for collapse. I teach sometimes. I do stuff on globalization and that, and global financial markets, and people oftentimes have two responses. They either go, well, it's fine. The world economic system is going to be fine. It's just going to be fine. It's going to sort itself out. It'll be fine. It's just a blip, And seriously, I mean, people do believe that, right? We kind of corrected it. It's okay. It's, whatever. That stimulus package got us over that shit. It's all cool. And the other one is that it's just the whole thing's going down. It's going to collapse. And I don't buy either one, frankly speaking. And I don't buy either one because I think it's an absence of criticality in my perspective. I think it's a remove from criticality because the entire thing is not going to go down. It may well go down. It may look catastrophic. Shit may get ugly. But certain people are going to profit tremendously and do every time shit goes down. And that it's always a differential. It's not like tomorrow we're all sitting outside, with all of a sudden all our shit goes away and we're all sitting there with, the clothes on our back and we have to make do. It's not going to go like that. And tremendous amounts of poverty, tremendous amounts of unhappiness, of misery are going to occur, while huge amounts of prosperity are going to occur in other sectors. And you see this right away in the current economic downturn. You will see, of course, right, that jobs are being sloughed off like crazy, that it's an economic disaster by most measures, and simultaneously Wall Street profits are at a record high. So even in the turning, so that's what I'll see. So when people say it's all going to go down, that's not my perspective. I think that we're nearing eco-collapse of some kind. No, I take that back. I think we're encountering eco-collapse in lots of ways. I think that we are have encountered bio degradation in ways that none of us can actually really understand. I think that we are toying with all kinds of horrific catastrophe in all kinds of ways. And I think that we're actually on the cusp of some incredible economic transformations. That said, I don't think it's collapsed, and I don't think that language helps us a lot. I think that certain people, it's going to go down differentially. It's going to go down in all kinds of ways, and so I really, lots of ways. For me, it's really attractive to, and really, I find it actually very soothing to think about collapse in lots of ways. It makes me feel like, oh, okay, but I think it's an easy way out. I think it's an easy way out because it actually prevents us from the hard work and in some ways the lengthy work and the struggles to rethink ourselves out of this, to work our way out of this. Because any kind of collapse, any kind of degradation is going to happen differentially, right? So you saw this in the current economic circumstances. But anything starts getting severe, it's going to result in incredibly disproportionate amounts of misery for people who have already suffered and people who already have tremendous amount of privilege, economic and otherwise, are going to continue to benefit and probably benefit differentially. So, to my mind, that's a huge part of that, and I know, and I'm probably going to misphrase it here, but I've heard, I think it was Mr. Jensen say something about bringing the plane down slowly, and that idea, is that true? Or something like that, maybe working. I mean, that idea is plausible to me in some ways, but bringing that plane down slowly is like centuries of work, beyond the scope of my personal imagination. So my feeling is that we don't need to retreat. The imperative, in particular for a at one time super healthy anyways, a white boy like me, is to engage in struggle, not to withdraw from Not to flee from urban struggle, but to embrace it and to embrace the possibility of it. And so, I'm sorry, I'm almost there. Is to say something like, when I talk about urbanization, I talk about densification, and I talk about learning how to share stuff. I have a tremendous amount of faith in our possibilities, and I guess this is my other one about imagination is that yeah, you know, like I look in, well, some of you have probably been in the Thistle, right? And it's, you know, so I'm not talking about office towers necessarily, but you look at, for example, East Vancouver, and I have to say that after 20 years of living in East Vancouver, I find a tremendous amount of community. In a lot of ways, a really shitty city. A city that's dominated by, you know, neoliberalism. A city that's dominated by vast amounts of capital, and a city that KPMG, the global accounting firm, just named the most corporate business tax-friendly city in the world. Not Phoenix, not Atlanta, nowhere. Vancouver is the city with the most corporate-friendly tax regime. And even in that city, I found a tremendous amount. So I do know my neighbors, and I do see, and I'm not that, you know, I'm not the only one by a long shot. The neighbors do know each other, and that we are tearing up shit as fast as we can fucking tear it up to, you know, to build gardens, without compromising that kind of density. I forget the question. So, yeah, go on. Let me stop there. Please.
So the next one, as settlers, a major issue in having a discussion on how we should be living while we're on the land stolen from other peoples is that it can be seen as a continuation of the colonial process. Although it may have been our ancestors that stole this land, not us, we are still living on it and still gaining from that relationship of occupation. So I'm going to start again with you, Matt, on this and say, doesn't arguing for urbanism and for people to move into cities from the countryside assume that we settlers are just going to continue living here on these unceded lands? How can we move out of a relationship of occupier if we have already decided that we're unwilling to negotiate our place on these lands before even opening up the dialogue with the people whose lands we're squatting?
Can you say that last part again? Sorry, do that later.
Sure. How can we move out of the relationship of occupier if we've already decided that we're unwilling to negotiate our place here on these lands before even opening up the dialogue with the people whose lands we are squatting?
What do you mean by unwilling to negotiate our place in land? Like,
well, if we assume that people are going to stay living here, like the cities, if we're promoting city living and urban living, that seems to be promoting that we stay living here on the unceded lands.
Yeah, I guess it does, eh? And I guess a lot, I mean, it has some sort of, again, what's the word I want to use? It's attractive to think, you know what, okay, let's push a pause button, everybody go home, you know? Everybody go home. You know, you go back to, where'd you say you're from? I don't know. Somewhere, you know, somewhere in Europe. Everybody go home now. Everybody go home. Let's go. You know, everybody get 20 minutes, pack your bags, and let's roll. You know, it's nice, you know, like, and I don't mean that kind of sentiment. I mean, for sure. I mean, that at some level, you go, okay, that would make sense, right? You know, I can't see it. You know, we're an incredible, like, ever since folks walked across the Bering Land Bridge, you know, people talk about globalization now, and globalization has always happened, right? Globalization is a human condition, right? And that's what it's from. People have constantly moved, people have constantly shared stuff, people have constantly moved around. It's just that it's happening with an intensification, a speed that is unbelievable now. And more importantly, it's what we would call a rendition of neoliberal globalization, so one that's driven by greed. And so I think that we're here, you know, I think that we are here. So yeah, unwilling to negotiate what that looks like. No, I think all of that should be open to negotiation as much as humanly possible. And counterintuitively, I should be, maybe I'm not being exactly clear enough as to say that I'm not interested in everybody living in huge cities. Because I think counterintuitively, our best chance to protect rural areas, to protect small towns, to protect villages, is for us to begin to living more compactly in whatever size of settlement. And I think about this sometimes when I drive. If you drive from Vancouver and you go out to somewhere up the valley or whatever, and you're heading out that way, and all of a sudden you pass this little sign, right? And it says, I use the sign because I remember it, but it says the village of Mallardville. And there's no fucking village there at all, right? It's like, it's just one other, it's highway, it's mini mall, it's mega mall, it's strip mall, it's just one, and you're like, and if they didn't have a sign, you wouldn't have known, nothing changed, right? And that's the same thing if you ever take a train from like from Whitby to like St. Catharines, like all the way through the Toronto corridor, right? There's just fucking nothing there. It's all the same fucking thing, right? It's just one thing after the other after the other. Our desire to sprawl, and I mean that in a larger sense, not just a physical suburban sense, but I mean that in a larger sense, in a philosophical sense, but also in a productive sense, has eviscerated small town life. It's eviscerated the possibility of rural life, and it's chawing up what's left of agricultural land, of wilderness, of rural land at an incredible rate. So I think the possibility of being able to think and talk about substantially moving huge chunks of land back to its rightful indigenous owners relies on us not sprawling over so much of their land. And I think that has to be an imperative again, is to take seriously not claims for self-government, because I'm not buying that, but I'm buying claims for self-determination. I don't think that indigenous rights should have to suffer settler forms of governance. I think that that's up to individual folks, or up to individual nations, and I think that if we're really going to take seriously returning, because interestingly, a buddy of mine who I spent a lot of time with, and probably many of you guys know, Dustin Rivers, he says it's, language for settlers, it's always been about rights, but for indigenous folks, it's always about return of land. Right? It's about and somehow we have to find ways to return huge swaths of land, huge chunks of land, back to indigenous control. So we got to get the hell off it. So, am I unwilling to compromise on us being here? That doesn't sound right to me. That sounds more like I think that we have to work from what we got, which is that we're here. Unwilling to, and I would say, personally, I would say eminently willing to talk about reconfiguration, in particular in terms around land.